G'day. I'm travelling to the Dandenong Ranges National Park, about 35 kilometres east of Melbourne. I'm running a landscape photography workshop up there where the students were interested in photographing forests. Forests are an interesting challenge because there's so much going on that you either have to try and find compositions that reduce the chaos or compositions that embrace the chaos and having different ways of showing the variety of textures and lines and colours and lighting. I'm also interested in looking for different types of photography, because one of the ways that you can reduce that chaos is to look for more intimate landscape shots, smaller scale shots that are emphasising the ground cover, the leaf litter, the fungi or the small plants on the ground or epiphytic plants on branches and trunks of trees, the tree bark and so on. But we have students who are also interested in shooting the grandeur of the forest and getting those broad scale grand photographs with lots of trees and the greenery and so on. We lived up here for over 10 years and I worked just halfway down the mountains, and coming home every night and coming round this bend, it just felt like another world where you're driving out of a little sort of outer suburb country village in Belgrave into this magnificent forest. You really knew you were coming home. Of course, Wallis Forest looks spectacular, none of it is old growth. It was all logged in the 19th and early 20th century. So there aren't many trees here that are older than 100 years, but they're certainly tall and they're spectacular. Mountain ash, or Eucalyptus regnans, the tallest hardwood tree in the world, is just a spectacular sight in these forests. And that's what we're going to be trying to photograph. The great Australian painter Tom Roberts lived in Callista for some of his life and painted some of his famous paintings around here, and one of those is on this sign. It's always worth looking at landscape painters and how they manage to simplify and compose. Obviously they are composing directly out of their brain. Even when they're looking at a landscape, they can choose what to add and what not to add. But photographically, we don't have that opportunity of dropping things out, but we can try and simplify those things by cropping, zooming, moving, shooting from different angles, and so on. So I'm shooting here with the 12 to 35 millimeter lens on my Panasonic G9. And that gives me just the right range of focal lengths to capture this, where I can get a broad view of this scene, but I can also zoom in a little bit to try and cut out some of the extraneous distractions on the sides and crop off some of the foreground, which is really not that interesting, and emphasize the vertical trunks of the eucalypt trees with that side lighting and the contrast between the shade in the foreground and the background and the lighting on the trees. So we'll give it a go. Because I want quite a deep depth of field, I've got foreground elements here that are a few meters in front of me, but I also want the detail in the background. I'm going to be shooting at quite a narrow aperture. I'm going to start off at f11 and see how I go there. I might have to bump that up to f16 or even f22 if I don't have enough depth of field, or I could focus stack by taking a series of shots focusing on the foreground, the midground and the background, and then stack them later. I don't think I'm going to need to do that. That's typically only required when you have really close foreground elements that you simply can't get enough depth of field to include both the foreground and the background. My foreground elements here are a few meters in front of me, so I should be able to get enough depth of field here just using that narrow aperture. And here's a shot taken later in the day in less harsh light, where I used different layers from the foreground to the midground to the background and the natural haze of the eucalypt forest to display the depth, which tends to reduce the chaos. Even though this is quite busy, your eye passes naturally from the foreground through the midground and still has interest in the background to look at. Another way of reducing the visual clutter is to reduce the image to black and white, in this case a sepia tone, where the eye is now concentrating on shape, form and texture rather than having to unpack all the different colours in an image as well. One of the joys of these tall forests is getting enclosed. The challenge when photographing them is finding a spot that you can capture the essence of this being enclosed and covered in. And one of the things you can do to do that is to shoot directly upwards. Find a location that allows you to shoot directly up into the canopy and show that cover over the top of you. Give it a go. Another thing that's worth looking for is close-ups, small intimate details in the landscape. So look around, look up, look down, look sideways. These ferns sitting on the side of the tree fern caught my attention, particularly with the way the light was bouncing off them and the different shades of greens and browns in them.